2 miles. That's all. 2 miles of freezing Arctic water separating two islands, two nations, and something far stranger. 2 completely different days on the calendar. You are standing on American soil, looking west across the Bering Strait. The gray water churns below you. And somewhere in that mist, just ahead, is tomorrow. Not tomorrow as a metaphor, not tomorrow as a feeling. Literally, factually, geographically tomorrow. A place where today has already ended and a new date has begun. The distance between these two islands is roughly 2.4 miles at their closest point. You could kayak it, in theory. Some have tried. Very few have been welcomed on the other side. One island belongs to the United States of America. The other belongs to the Russian Federation. Together they sit at one of the most extraordinary geographical coincidences on the entire planet. This is the story of the Diomede Islands, where east meets west, where yesterday borders tomorrow, and where the map of the world does something almost unbelievable. To understand these islands, you have to understand where they sit. The Bering Strait is the narrow passage of ocean connecting the Pacific to the Arctic, between Alaska and Siberia. At its widest, the Bering Strait stretches about 55 miles across. At its narrowest, near the Diomedes, the two continental landmasses are separated by roughly 53 miles of open water. But the islands themselves act as stepping stones, ancient, wind-battered rocks thrust up from the seafloor, sitting almost perfectly in the middle of this icy mythological passage. The larger of the two is Big Diomede. It is Russian territory. It rises sharply from the water, a dramatic cliff-edged island of roughly 11 square miles of rock and wilderness. Big Diomede sits on the Russian side of the maritime boundary. It has no permanent civilian population. The Russian military maintains a presence here, but ordinary life as we know it does not exist. Then there is Little Diomede, smaller, slightly lower, sitting just 3 miles to the east on the American side. This island belongs to Alaska, to the United States, and to its people. Little Diomede is home to a real, living community. The native Inupiaq village of Diomede, population roughly 80 to 100 people, clinging to the western face of the island. Homes are stacked up the hillside like shelves in a library. There are no roads, no dock large enough for supply ships to anchor safely, and no permanent airstrip on flat ground. These two islands were named by the Danish explorer Vitus Bering in 1728, who sailed through the strait bearing his name. He spotted them on the feast day of St. Diomede. Now for the part that bends the mind, the 21-hour time difference. To explain it, we need to talk about something drawn on maps but invisible in the physical world, the international date line. Every day on Earth begins somewhere. When it is midnight in one place, the rest of the planet is at various stages of that same day, or the next one, depending on where you stand. The world is divided into 24 time zones, one for each hour of the day. As you travel west, you set your clock back. Travel east, you move it forward. Simple enough in theory. But the planet is a sphere. Those 24 time zones have to start and end somewhere. That seam, that invisible line where one day hands off to the next, is the international date line. In most of its length, the date line runs straight down the 181st meridian, cutting through the open Pacific Ocean, far from any major population centers. It causes very little disruption there, but near the top of the world, near the Arctic, the line cannot simply run straight. If it did, it would cut right through the middle of Russia, splitting Siberia into 2 different days. So the date line does something unusual. It bends. It jogs sharply to the east, dipping between the two Diomede Islands, carving a path through the narrow strip of water between them. This deliberate detour means that Big Diomede, sitting to the west of the line, is on one side, in tomorrow. And Little Diomede, just 2.4 miles east, is on the other, in today. Let's make this concrete. When it is Sunday noon on Little Diomede, It is Monday on Big Diomede. The same sun is shining on both islands. The same Arctic wind is blowing across both shores. But the calendar says something different. One island is living a day that the other island has not yet reached. Time, that most personal and universal of human experiences, has been officially split in two. The difference is not just 24 hours either, because the time zones themselves add another layer. Russia's far eastern zone is ahead of Alaska Standard Time by roughly 21 hours, not a clean 24. Think of it this way. When it is 6 p.m. Saturday on Little Diomede, it is already 3 p.m. Sunday on Big Diomede. The same afternoon light, 2 different days, 2 different meanings entirely. This is not a glitch in the system. It is the system working exactly as intended. Human beings drew this line deliberately, deciding where one day ends and another begins across the face of the earth. In doing so, they created one of the most poetic geographical facts in existence. 2 neighbors, close enough to shout across the water, permanently living in different days of the week. The date line between the Diomedes is more than a cartographic curiosity. It is a reminder that time itself, something we treat as natural and absolute, is, in the end, a human invention. For thousands of years before any of these lines existed, the Inupiaq people paddled freely between the islands. Big Diomede was inhabited. Little Diomede was inhabited. Family connected both shores. The Yupik and Inupiaq peoples of this region did not see a border between the islands. They saw a hunting ground, a trade route, a world that moved with the ice and the seasons. Then came the 20th century. Then came politics. Then came the Cold War. And with it, a border so heavily enforced that it might as well have been a wall of solid Arctic ice. In 1948, the Soviet Union expelled the native inhabitants of Big Diomede and relocated them to the Siberian mainland. Overnight, a living community became a military installation. Families were permanently separated. Imagine waking up and being told the island where your ancestors were buried is now off limits, that your cousins, your grandparents, your history, all of it is now on the other side of an iron curtain. That is what happened here. The Diomede Islands became one of the most tangible symbols of the Cold War divide, not in Berlin, not in Korea, but in the frozen Bering Strait. American journalists and writers began calling the strip of water between the islands the ice curtain, a polar mirror of the Iron Curtain dividing Europe. The name was brutal in its accuracy. Soviet patrol boats monitored the strait. The Russian military built radar installations and listening posts on Big Diomede. The island became an eyer pressed against the American side of the Arctic. On Little Diomede, the Inupiaq community carried on. They hunted walrus and seal. They raised children. They watched the island 2.4 miles away and knew that people who looked like them once lived there. Throughout the Cold War, travel between the islands was completely forbidden. Not discouraged, not complicated. Forbidden. The maritime boundary was one of the most closely watched lines anywhere on the frozen Earth. There were extraordinary moments of attempted connection. In 1987, long-distance swimmer Lynn Cox swam across the Bering Strait, not the full distance, but from Little Diomede toward Soviet waters, as a gesture of peace. Soviet and American leaders praised her swim. Mikhail Gorbachev mentioned it by name at a summit with President Reagan. A woman in a swimsuit had accomplished something diplomacy had struggled to do for decades. The Cold War eventually ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. Restrictions on travel across the strait loosened, briefly, tantalizingly. There was talk of restoring connections, of helicopter services, of reuniting the divided communities. But those promises largely faded. The Russian military never left Big Diomede. The island remains off-limits to casual visitors. The ice curtain may no longer be Soviet, but it is still very much there. Today, the relationship between the two islands is defined by proximity without contact. Two pieces of land that can see each other every clear day, and yet remain as separate as two different worlds. Life on Little Diomede is unlike anything most of us will ever experience. The village has no hotel, it has no restaurant. There is one school, one store, and a population where everyone knows everyone. Supply deliveries are a constant challenge. In winter, when the sea freezes solid enough, a makeshift ice runway allows small aircraft to land. For weeks each year, this is the only reliable link to the mainland. When the ice is too thin to land on and too thick to navigate by boat, the island can be completely cut off from the outside world. No deliveries, no medical evacuation, just the island and the sea. Helicopters service the community in some seasons, but weather in the Bering Strait is notoriously violent and unpredictable. A medical emergency on Little Diomede requires a gamble on the weather holding long enough to help. The people who live here are not here by accident. They are here by choice and by heritage, descended from communities that have called this rock home for centuries, long before any nation claimed it. Children grow up learning to read the ice. Hunters still pursue walrus from traditional umiaks, skin boats that have carried Inupiaq people across these waters for generations. The modern world coexists with the ancient one. Communication has improved in recent years. Satellite internet has reached the island. Young people connect with the rest of the world through screens. The ice curtain has at least become somewhat transparent to information. And yet, the fundamental conditions remain: the cold, the isolation, the wind that strips warmth from exposed skin in minutes, the endless gray water, and just beyond it, that other island, always visible, always close. Residents of Little Diomede can stand outside their front doors and look directly at Russian territory. On a clear day, the Siberian mainland is also visible on the horizon. The world ends very close here. There is a kind of clarity that comes with living at the edge of everything, at the edge of nations, at the edge of the calendar, at the edge of the habitable world. People here understand it. So here is where we leave you. Two islands, 2.4 miles apart. One nation looking east toward America. One nation looking west toward Russia. And between them, an invisible line that separates not just countries, but days. The international date line is a human agreement, nothing more. There is no physical wall in that water, no cliff, no barrier, just an understanding between nations that here, in this narrow Arctic gap, tomorrow begins. And yet that agreement is as real as anything built from steel and concrete. It shapes lives. It divided families for decades. It turns neighbors into residents of different days on the same earth. We draw lines on maps, and then we live inside them as though the lines were always there, as though time zones and borders and nations were mountains or rivers, as permanent as the planet itself. The Diomede Islands remind us they are not. That 2 miles away, tomorrow already exists. That the world is stranger and more beautifully arbitrary than we remember. That time, in the end, is something we chose.